webinar relative to submitting Proposition 2.5 votes using DLS Gateway. My name is Jennifer McAllister, and I support training initiatives here at DLS. We're going to just give you a brief overview of what DLS does as a reminder and while people are logging in. We promote sound municipal finance management practices and support local officials by providing guidance, training, and oversight. Our bureaus are responsible for ensuring the fairness and equity of local property taxation, the accuracy and quality of local accounting and treasury management, interpreting state laws that affect local governance, advising municipalities on opportunities to improve their financial management operation, distributing local aid, and maintaining a comprehensive data bank report library focused on municipal finance. Before we get started, I want to remind participants that this webinar will be recorded and posted on the DLS YouTube channel for future reference. The webinar, PowerPoint presentation, and all the links highlighted during the webinar will be shared with you later this week via email. And if you have any questions, please use the question and answer format, which is on the menu bar on the bottom of your screen. And they'll be answered at the end of the presentation. At this time, I'd like to introduce Lisa Krzywicki, Deputy Bureau Chief for the Data Analytics and Resource Bureau, to guide us through submitting Proposition 2.5 votes using DLS Gateway.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining, and thanks, Jen, for that wonderful introduction. Today, I'm going to talk about something that is very near and dear to my heart, which is the Proposition 2.5 votes that get entered into Gateway. Prior to this fall, we would enter these in the Data Analytics and Resource Bureau, and it would go into the tax rate forms. And we've opened it up now so that the clerks will be able to enter it directly in there. And it's our hope that this will streamline the process, prevent issues where things were maybe emailed in and we didn't receive it, or, you know, in today's climate, someone may have mailed it in and we may not get it for weeks because of the hybrid model and the fact that we've got a new post office box, which usually leads us to some issues. So I'm going to get started right away and let you know what I'm going to cover today. So we're going to talk about what is the ballot processing process in Gateway. Always an important thing that I touch on anytime I do a presentation with the clerks is accessing Gateway. Also equally as important is what to do when you can't remember your login credentials. And then where do you find the screen to enter the votes? From there, we're going to move along into what information is required as part of the vote data entry process. What types of votes are being entered? What happens to that information if it's not entered into Gateway? And where does it show up when the tax rate forms, when it is entered? And maybe not as obvious to some of you folks, but how is this data useful once it is in our Gateway application? And then the last page of the slide deck, which, as Jennifer said, will be sent out to everyone, has some additional resources that include links to find guidance on things that you need to do as you go through the process. So the first thing is entering the votes into Gateway. How do we do it? So I'm sure that you're all familiar with the Gateway login screen. You can see it there on the slide. And if you don't remember what your login is, if you click on Forgot Username, it'll pop up a box that you can select your jurisdiction, and it'll tell you someone that can help you identify what your username is or reset your password. If that fails, obviously you can always email us at dlsgateway@dor.state.ma.us, and we will be happy to help you identify your username or reset your password for you. The location of the votes in our DLS Gateway application is under the tax rate module. Clerks use the module for entering on the DE1, or at least signing off on the DE1. And if you look on that module, you'll see the new screens that have been added to the tax rate under finance, listing out the different types of vote by type. And they do have to go in by type because each one has a slightly different purpose and where it interacts with the rest of the Gateway tax rate forms. As Jennifer said, if you have questions, just write them into the question and answer, and I will get to them at the end. Or my bureau chief, Kirsten Shire, is also on this webinar, and she may be able to just pop the answer in for you, so you don't have to wait until the end to get it. Also, in relationship to questions, is there were some that were sent in, and if I don't cover them in the chat, in the presentation, I will talk about them at the end, because some of them don't relate to the Prop 2.5 votes. But fear not, we will get all your questions answered. So the first vote is an override. And as you know, that's a vote that's approved by the voters to increase the amount of the tax levy. And that amount gets added into the levy limit sheet. So this screen here shows what you need to put in. It's pretty easy to follow along. So the biggest thing is that you need to create a electronic version of the specimen ballot. So you can scan it, you can take a picture with your phone, whatever method works easiest for you to get it, as long as we can read it. Because part of our job is to validate that what you said the ballot was for is what it really is for, and that the vote count that you indicated on the ballot is correct. For most communities, it's straightforward. You're going to enter in the date of the vote. If it was a win or a loss, you enter in the yes and no votes. I will tell you that if you put it in as a loss and you entered vote counts that made it a win, you'll get an error message that'll pop up. You want to enter the purpose and the department that it relates to. So if you passed an override to fund the some salaries in the public works department, that's the department that you would list that under. The applicable fiscal year is going to automatically populate, and then you need to put in an amount. And that amount will carry through to the levy limit sheet once you submit and we review it and approve it. And you're going to see on our slides this caution symbol with deleting votes, and I'm not going to talk about it once. I just want to keep reminding people, you can't go in and delete historic votes and once the tax rate's been set. But what you can do, and you should not do, is if you entered a vote in the spring and now it's fall time, you're entering a new vote, you want to make sure you don't go in and delete that spring vote, because it hasn't actually been used yet, because you're still in the tax rate process. And then the most important thing is, anytime you're in doubt as to whether you're doing the right thing or not, you just reach out to us in the Gateway support or the data bank support lines, and we'll help you. Excuse me. So opposite of an override, which adds to the levy, we have an underride, and that will reduce the levy. Very few communities do underrides, and lots of times the reasoning for an underride is that you passed an override in the previous year and you didn't need to have that full amount. So to give credit back to the taxpayers, you pass an underride. But the mechanics are the same. One thing I didn't mention on the previous screen, and it hasn't been used in a number of years, is the pyramid vote, which is a tiered vote where you have multiple tiers to the ballot question, and you pick the one that the voters get to pick the one that they want as being the amount. I don't recall having a tiered vote in the last 20 years, but it's still an option if it happens. And you'll see that to make it very easy to work with, the screens are very, very similar across the board. It's what happens once you use this particular screen that is different, but the entry is going to be pretty straightforward. The next one that I'm going to talk on is the capital outlay exclusions. And this is for a one-time expenditure for usually the purchase of like a pumper truck or something, that, not a pumper truck because that's a bigger, but a plow blade for the DPW, which is not something that you're going to borrow long-term for. It's going to be a one-time thing, and it'll be added to the levy for 1 year only, and then it comes off the following year. And again, the screen is very similar to the previous screens for entry, except that you'll notice that the pyramid vote box has been removed. And that's because you can't you can't pick and choose on this one. It's, if you say it's going to cost $20,000 for the plow blade, that's what the cost is that's entered on here. And again, you're going to keep doing that same thing where you're adding in the description of the vote and the department that it's attributed to. And I'm going to pause there for a second and just talk about that, because these votes are all kind of similar in their data collection. So this is going to show on the levy limit sheet increases to the levy, but what it shows historically in our data reports is it shows the number of attempts that a community has had at passing an override or a capital exclusion, and how many of those were wins and how many of those were losses. So one of the questions that we've received, and we receive it a lot, is do I enter only winning votes? Well, we have a loss option in there, so the answer is probably no. We want you to enter both wins and losses. And there's a really good reason for that, because remember, the Division of Local Services data is public. It's all public information. So we have reports on our website where somebody can look and see, you know, did the neighboring towns attempt a capital exclusion? And if they did they win? Did they lose? That's one aspect of it. But also the press or the administration or taxpayers in general, anybody, because it's on the web, can look at it. And if you're only putting in entering winning votes, the assumptions are being made that most Prop 2.5 votes are winning, when it may not be the case. So it's important to put both in. And it really doesn't take a lot of time to do it. You know, if you're a community that has a lot of capital exclusions, you might have, you know, a few minutes of entry, but it's really not going to take that much time to do it. And it's usually all on the same ballot. So once the upload, it's going to be one single upload process. But it is better for people to make good assumptions rather than bad assumptions with data. But we can only rely on the data submitted to us by the community to make sure that the assumptions are being made on good data. So just keep that in mind as you go forward. And if you get stuck with that and you're not sure how to deal with it, you can call us and we'll help you. We're very willing to help. So when you enter these votes into the system, there's gonna be some messages that the assessors will see that if you didn't enter in, or if you entered in the vote, excuse me, and we haven't reviewed it, then the assessors, when they go to submit the levy limit sheet, are going to get these error warnings that will say that it requires DLS to do some action. If nothing has been entered, the assessors will be notified that there's something that has to be checked, and the assessors usually know, so they might be calling you and asking you to make sure you entered the vote. And then the other part is if you entered the form but didn't submit it, it's going to cause an error message for them as well. And just like everything in Gateway, we have ways of seeing the information, but we don't accept it as being submitted to us unless the submit button is actually clicked, because it would be a poor assumption on my part to think that you had entered all your votes in if you hadn't yet. And I just approved it and you had more votes to go in, and then I have to unlock it for you. All of which takes just seconds to do. But this is usually happening at a time when you're trying to get your tax rate set. So we want to keep the process moving and not bog it down. The other thing that is important about this is if you have these votes, whether it's an override, an underride, a capital exclusion, a debt exclusion, you want to do that as soon as you possibly can after the vote happens, because I'm just like everybody else. If a bill comes in and I throw it on my desk and say, yeah, I'll take care of that over the weekend, other stuff gets dropped on it. I forget about doing it. Next thing I know, Eversource is calling me and saying I didn't pay my bill and they're going to shut my electricity off, and that would be terrible. So just like that, you want to make sure that when you've done your final counts and everything is all set, that you are actually entering that into the system so that you don't forget about it and then have chaos when it's time to set your tax rate and there's votes that are missing, and you know, everyone's kind of trying to run around trying to find what needs to be entered. Debt exclusions are very different than the other votes. So debt exclusions are ones that you will borrow over a period of time for a project. And it is very likely that you may have passed debt exclusion 2 years ago and have not used it yet. And this is where we see the most problems, where data doesn't get entered timely. So again, that just speaks to, it's done, you've done your counts, you've certified the vote, put it in. And then you can put it away, put it in microfiche, whatever it is that you do with your ballot questions. This asks for a little bit different information. And the status column is really not relating to what you're doing, but what it does say is that absolutely nothing can happen to that vote because it's already being used on a DE1. But you're going to enter the same information, and this big significant difference, as you all know, is that a debt exclusion does not include a dollar amount, because you don't necessarily know what the cost of that project is going to be at this time. You may get some reimbursement that'll offset some of the costs. You may not have to fully borrow for it. So as you borrow, that's when it gets used, and it gets used on the DE1 form, which I don't believe I did. I'm sorry. So if you look at this slide, you'll see where a debt exclusion that is entered into the vote system is being used on the DE1. The top one, the top image is the DE1, and the bottom is the debt exclusion. And how that happens is the Bureau of Accounts field representative will take and look at your debt exclusions that have been entered into the vote system and compare it to those appearing on the DE1 that do not show attached. And then we'll align that vote up and then kind of lock it down for use for that particular purpose. This is not something that the clerks do, but it's important to understand that what you do or don't do as part of the vote process has an impact in other places on the gateway application. And then this one is similar to Underrides, where it's very underused, is the stabilization fund override. And this works in a sense that the voters approve an override for the stabilization that will put money into a stabilization fund. And in the first year, you're going to enter this information in just like you would any other vote. And if it's a loss, we do want you to record those as well. This, in subsequent years, you're going to call up the vote screen again, and you'll see that there's that one from the previous year when it was approved is going to exist there. And you're going to put in what the new amount is for the current year. And you have to have a copy of the Board of Selectmen's vote approving the increase. And that increase is limited to 2.5% of the prior year amount. So you can't just say, I have a $3,000 stabilization fund override, and this year I think I want it to be, 10,000. It can't be adjusted in more than by 2.5%. So this is the last screen of this, and then I'm going to actually go out into the gateway application and show you it live, because it really, looking at it on slides where it's not interacting is sometimes hard. I see that there's a comment about, is there something you're hearing over my voice? It is quite likely that it's the vent in the office that I'm sitting in, so I apologize for that. Okay, so this page shows you links. Jen is going to drop in the chat in the QA a link to a user guide that we have on the website for using the DLS gateway application to enter the votes. The other is some contact information. There's been some questions about I'm new as a clerk and I don't know what to do. So the Proposition 2.5 ballot questions, requirements, and procedures is a very good user guide that is on our website that you can use. It's also in the Training and Resource Center, which if you haven't checked out, I would highly recommend that you take a look at that. And then some of the steps, the process about the levy limits and how they work and whatnot may not fall into your everyday duties, but as someone working with it, you may be interested. So you can see the levy limits, a primer on how Prop 2.5 works. If you've never looked at the video, which I didn't include here, but it is in our application, our training center, Prop 2.5, all the different videos associated with it. And if you knew Kathleen Kaleri, it's one last time that you can actually hear her voice. We immortalized her by having her record that. And then the last part of the slide shows some data that we have on our website. And each of those will bring you to a report where you can see if we have your votes. So if you think that you've entered your vote into Gateway in the past, or that you sent it into us, and you can check there and see if it's in there. You can also do some analyzing on the other communities around you or statewide, how the votes have gone. And again, the disclaimer is the data is only as good as what is submitted to us by cities and towns. So remember, submitting lost votes as well as win votes is definitely important. So now, I'm gonna just go onto our website. So I think I have to stop sharing for a second. So you might see a little bit of changes going on. Okay, so hopefully I have on the screen an image of our DLS Gateway application. Jennifer or Kirsten, would you be able to confirm?
Yes, it is on the screen.
Thanks. So when you're in Gateway, here's the tax rate module that I mentioned in the slides. And you click on that, you will be able to go down here and see the different types of votes. So if we wanted to enter an override, and we can just pick any random community, because I'm not really in Gateway, I'm in fake Gateway. What's going to happen is you're going to see it default with today's date. It assumes that today is the date the vote was taken, just so that it's not leaving it blank. So if this was a vote from last week, go in, you make it the 8th. You can click this drop down and make it a win. You can enter the winning vote count and the losing votes. So I picked general, school, and town operations. And this is what a lot of the overrides are specifically for. So you would just call that general government as the department, and then the amount. And when I save, it'll show that it's there. But you're not done yet. You need to upload documents to add in there. And I'm thinking it's going to work, but let's see. Okay. So I'm just uploading something that I had. So that's there, and you can make it visible to you. And then you're going to click the signature box, and you're going to sign, and it's going to autofill your signature. Now, if you find that you get to this point, and you're like, geez, I don't have that signature box. As a clerk, hopefully you have admin permissions, and you can go into the security screen and adjust your permissions to give you the ability to sign that. We did make a blanket modification to all Gateway, but sometimes things happen and it's not exactly there. Or you can reach out to us on the support line or the data bank line, and we'll be quickly able to add that to your permission, so you'll be fine. So now I haven't actually submitted this, I've just saved it. And what I want to show you is that if I go to the levy limit sheet, I have an override that's in form entered status. So as an assessor, I would not be able to submit this form because that's not complete. So I would have to go back into the override and click submit and confirm that that's what I wanted to do. And then go back to the levy limit sheet. And you'll see that it's been submitted. It still requires approval, which because of the magic of Gateway, I can actually do that as well. But you would not be able to. What would happen is that would appear on a screen for us, telling us that we need to go into Gateway and approve this vote entry so that it will be added to the levy limit sheet. So you see the $100,000 is there, but it's still not complete. So once I, as Lisa Krzwicki, go in and click approve, and then I go back to the levy limit sheet one more time, you'll see that it's now approved. The assessors can go do their thing and then submit the form and continue on with their tax rate process. I hope that that makes sense. And for each of them, it's basically the same entries that are going to happen. Did anyone have any additional questions that came up as a result of seeing that piece of it? Not seeing there. So when Jennifer sent out the registration, she always asks for questions that you may be looking to have answered. So the first one that we got was, do you report the failed Prop 2.5 questions? And as I explained, you do. But this question actually went on to say, or the town meeting. So the only thing this is for is actual referendum approved by the voters. So at town meeting, if you approved an article that would put a ballot question out for the next election, you don't put that in here. All you're putting in here is the actual ballots, as they were, voted on by the people. And again, it's important that you find some way to make an electronic version of the ballot so that you can upload the specimen ballot, and you can write right on the ballot what the vote counts were, so that you're not having to upload a bunch of stuff. Everything is there. And what we'll do is we'll open that up and look at it and make sure that the description matches what the ballot question said. You don't have to write a paragraph for the description. You want to keep it very, very concise. And then we'll double check your vote counts, because, we're all subject to making errors. So we want to make sure that what we're collecting and reviewing is accurate. So we'll review that and make sure that that's all okay. But anything that has to do with something that was voted at town meeting, you do not need to send to us. Definitely do not need to send it to the data bank email either. The other question is submitting bylaws, excuse me, submitting bylaws to DOR after town meeting, how to do it. You actually do not submit bylaw changes to the Division of Local Services. You do send them to the Attorney General's office to make sure that they comply with law, but it's not, DLS does not oversee that. There was a question there was actually two questions from Clerks that are brand new. And this is all we're talking about here is Prop 2.5 vote questions going into Gateway, which is a new process. And that's why we're doing a webinar on it. If you have questions about other things, you're welcome to give me a call or call the data bank, and we'll help you out as to whether you need to submit it to us. There's a fair amount of confusion with the clerks as to like who gets what information in DLS, and we're always happy to walk you through who you need to send stuff in so that you're meeting your requirements. There is one question about, as a new clerk, I'm hoping to get instructions about entering information into a portal. I think that the portal that you're talking about is actually the motor voter registration portal, because we never call it gateway a portal. We always call it the DLS gateway application or gateway. So if you're talking about the portal, that's done by the Secretary of State's office. And you need to reach out to their voter division, the elections division at the Secretary of State's office about using the portal and how you access it and information like that. If that's not what you were talking about and you are on this webinar and I did not answer your question, you can feel free to email the data bank and to say, attention, Lisa, exactly what your question is, and I'll be happy to reach out to you today and try to talk you through it. And that data bank email address is databank, one word, at dor.state.ma.us. I think I've covered all the questions that were in here. And I know Kirsten's been answering some questions. Are there any other questions that have come up that have not been answered? Give you a couple of minutes if you want to type something in. So I'm going to talk about this, even though it's not part of my presentation. Remember, as clerks, you are asked to maintain the local officials directory. The local officials directory is an important part of communication for DLS. We use that to notify communities of things that happen in Gateway so that you can stay in the loop. We use it to send out special things, like in the past couple of years with all the COVID related things that came up. We were pulling in certain groups out of the LOD and sending it out to them so that they were, getting it right into their email. It's also been part of the basis of creating the DLS alerts, where you get notified of city and town, you get notified of reminders asking you to submit stuff. You get reminders about the new releases of local aid estimates, all that kind of important information, and a lot of the information that we sent out in the past couple of years about COVID relief and ARPA funds. That information goes out that way. So you want to make sure that you try to keep that up to date. And the reason that we ask the clerks is that you have your finger on the pulse of elections. So you know who the new officials are in a community. We only know about it when we get a call from somebody and they're like, we don't know how to get this information. But you're part of the group, and you may be the person assigning rights to people to access Gateway. So you have a lot more information on the communities than we do. And Nancy, I know Kirsten is answering it. If you have more questions on the Underride, you can feel free to reach out. But it is part of the slide deck. It's just very similar to an override in its mechanisms of how you put it into the system. Any other questions? Correct, Jennifer. We're only good at the question that just came in is, just to be clear, we're only adding information here for elections. Town meeting votes get sent on the DH82. So the Prop 2.5 actual election vote information gets sent here. Town meeting votes for the DA82, only when the town meeting vote approved the borrowing do you include that on the DA82. Otherwise, you would not be submitting a DA82. Any others? Well, if there are no other questions, I'm ready to let you all go back to your busy day in town hall, as we're in the midst of setting tax rates, and maybe you have some votes that you need to enter and you just remembered that because you went to this presentation. So thank you very much for your time and attention to this. And like I said, the slide deck will be sent out by Jennifer. And if you have any immediate questions that come up, you definitely don't want to email me, because my email address is probably one of the hardest in the entire world to remember, but you can always get to me through databank, one word, at dor.state.ma.us. Thank you for joining us.